Yellow teeth. Danny's brother was a dick, but he also had the biggest TV, so that's how we ended up at Mike's. It was pretty much what you'd expect. Cheap booze, Mario Kart, and more shit-talking than a Modern Warfare 2 lobby. Another benefit of choosing to go to Mike's was that the guy almost always had weed. So of course by midnight the entire living room was enveloped in a haze of thick blue smoke. At some point it was decided it was time for us to go home by Mike, if you can believe it. And then suddenly there we were, back on the street, stumbling and laughing in the way of a bunch of 17-year-olds who thought they were going to live forever. One by one we tapered off as we set off for our respective homes, until finally it was just Blake and me. I don't even know where the fuck Reese went. "You know what's fucked up?" said Blake suddenly, turning to face me. We had been walking for the better part of 20 minutes, and up until this point things had been jovial. Now, his expression was somber and intense, like a confidant relaying some critical piece of classified information. "What's that?" "This is right around where that Mallory girl disappeared. You remember? From last summer?" I thought back to the events of last August. One of the things about small communities, if anything ever happens, you can bet your bottom dollar that come that evening, everybody in town would have heard about it. And Mill Haven was no exception. For Mallory Cavish, news came almost immediately. I was in my room at the time, thumbing through one of my brother Dean's old Dragon Ball books, when I'd heard sudden commotion from downstairs. Turns out Mallory's mom and mine were in a book club together, were pretty close in fact, and so naturally when it happened my mom was one of the first people who got the call. I'll never forget the look on my mom's face, the way the color had seemed to immediately drain from it as she'd stood with the phone pressed firmly against one ear, listening wide-eyed as Mallory's mom had shrieked down the line. They'd found Mallory's body that morning, I later learned, while details of exactly what had happened to her were scarce. Rumor has it when they'd found her, whoever killed her had gone ahead and removed all of her teeth. If you believed some, and many do, this happened before she died, but of course that could just be small-town talk. Either way, it had shaken the community up pretty bad, before things slowly but surely returned to normal, the way they always seem to in the face of local tragedy. We walked for a while more, Blake and I shooting the shit a little longer before finally saying our goodbyes, and then suddenly it was just me. I walked with my head down and my shoulders raised, suspiciously eyeing each row of corn I passed, just on the off chance there should be some lunatic with a tooth fetish crouched there, pliers in hand. I'd sobered up long ago by this point, and though it was still June, a cold wind had begun to blow in, and I had the feeling rain wouldn't be far off. Sure enough, by the time I finally got to the bus stop 10 minutes later, a fine drizzle had begun. I huddled under the bus stop's meager roof, staring at the rain as it passed under the streetlight above, the light making each drop seem to glow. I've always thought there's something relaxing about watching the rain. I was still staring at the streetlight when I noticed movement in the corn several yards down the road from me. Curious, but not yet alarmed, I leaned forward, squinting against the rain, expecting a cat, maybe, or a raccoon. A man was standing in the corn. I jerked and let out a surprised gasp. He must have been 20-30 yards away, a tall, broad figure partially hidden by corn. At this distance, he was little more than a silhouette, but there was just enough light for me to make out what looked like a thick wool sweater and large, oversized construction boots. Startled, I immediately snapped my gaze away. All of a sudden, it felt important that I not let him know I'd seen him, though I couldn't have said exactly why this was the case. Intuition, perhaps. Is he just standing in the corn? What the hell? Not sure what to do. I turned and fixed my gaze on the road to my left, acting like I was looking for the bus. Where the hell was the bus? Before the compulsion became too great, and I looked back again. The man was closer now. Much closer, little more than a dozen yards. I hadn't even heard him move. What was more, now that he was nearer, I found I could make out more of his features. long, pale face, big, crooked nose, and teeth, rows of them, yellow and jagged, each one protruding out from his gums like corn kernels. I reached for my phone, figuring maybe Reese could still be nearby, my body acting as if on autopilot, no signal. Of course, I looked back again. The man was right across the street now, standing just outside the edge of the corn, facing me head-on. The rain fell in sheets between us, but I could still see that grin. All those teeth, jutting out of his gums like compound fractures. And those eyes, staring right at me into my very soul. And I knew then that whoever this guy was, he was absolutely, unequivocally insane. I went very still as a brief fight-or-flight struggle ensued in my mind. I was just steeling myself to run, when suddenly a pair of headlights crested the hill to my left. A hydraulic hiss followed shortly after as the bus rolled to a stop right in front of me. I didn't wait around. I threw myself at the doors and clambered aboard, inciting a curious glance from the driver, who grunted but said nothing as I quickly made my way to the back. A heartbeat later, and we were rolling. I stole frantic glances out the window as we pulled away, but alas, my yellow-toothed stalker was nowhere to be seen. I collapsed back into my seat, wet and suddenly exhausted. In the new safety of the bus, I began to question whether I had really just seen what I thought I had. Who the hell hangs out in a cornfield in the middle of the goddamn night? Anyway, I let out a short laugh as the obvious suddenly dawned. No, dipshit. Not a man, it was a scarecrow. You're in a cornfield. That's what you saw. Feeling reassured, I slumped down further in my seat, listening to the patter of rain as the bus continued to rumble along. We passed one stop, too. I was just starting to relax again, when all of a sudden the doors flapped open and I sucked in a breath. No fucking way. I watched in mute horror as the man from the corn slowly stepped onto the bus. In the new lighting, I could see my initial impressions of the guy had been way off. He wasn't just tall, he was gigantic, so tall in fact he had to stoop a little to stop from banging his head on the bus's ceiling. Thin strands of raven-black hair hung from his mostly bald scalp, framing a pale face and two piercing blue eyes, so wide the whites showed all around the iris. As if hearing my thoughts, he suddenly turned his head towards me, his eyes finding mine, and he grinned, once more affording me a perfect view of his awful kernel teeth. All the air left my body. There was no way he could have made it here in time to catch the bus. Even if the guy had run at full sprint, there was just no way. His boots slapped wetly against the vinyl floor as he made his way down the aisle towards where I sat. I looked around for help, but of course there was no one. Probably wouldn't have mattered even if there was. There are no good Samaritans on public transport. I heard the seat groan in protest as he slowly lowered himself down next to me. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, staring straight ahead, still smiling that awful smile. The smell hit me a second later. A smell like copper and pond water and something worse beneath. Like something that had once been alive and wasn't anymore, and it was all I could do not to throw up all over myself right then and there. I stared straight ahead, frozen, as the bus hissed and pulled away once again, realizing with sudden dawning horror that I was now trapped. Probably there had been a time I could have escaped, but that was over now. Did you know your teeth are the only part of your body that can't heal themselves? His voice when he spoke was impossibly low, as if summoned from somewhere very deep, but ragged too, like bones being dragged over concrete. It was the sound of glass breaking, children choking. Just the worst fucking sound I had ever heard. WH what? A person has 32 adult teeth, he continued, unless they lose some, or take extras. They're also the only part of the human body that won't rot away. Think about it. Every part of you gone except for your teeth. He turned his head to look at me, and I was unsurprised to find he was grinning again. I see you, and you see me. We see each other. That makes us friends. And friends share everything, even their secrets. He leaned in close. Can I tell you a secret? I opened my mouth to say no thanks, or I really have to go, or literally anything. The man reached into his pocket and held out his hand. Lying on his palm were a fistful of human teeth. There were molars and incisors, and others I didn't know the name for, their long roots speckled in bright blood. Fresh blood. I gripped the seat in front as the world suddenly grayed around me. I was going to die, I realized. I was going to die, and just like Mallory, my teeth would be plucked one by one from my head like petals off a daisy, until all that remained was my blood-streaked, gaping maw, fixed in its eternal death scream. They would find my body on the side of the road several days from now, mangled and mutilated, just as Mallory's had been, picked at by whatever carrion roamed nearby, or maybe not. Maybe instead I would be dragged into the field and left for the corn to consume me, eating me little by little until nothing remained of my existence but a vague sense that something bad had happened here, and to stay away. Would my parents ever find out what happened to me? My friends? Would they come looking? And if so, would they like what they found? Would there even be enough left to identify my body? They're also the only part of the human body that won't rot away. Think about it. Every part of you gone except for your teeth. I kicked him. I didn't mean to. It happened on instinct. My body acting of its own accord as it fought to save itself. To this day, I'm not sure how I even managed it, given the tight angle. All I know is one moment I was sitting there, staring up into his sweet baby blues. The next my foot was shooting up and out while the rest of me swiveled sideways, in a maneuver I would never be able to pull off in any other circumstance. I don't know if I was necessarily aiming for his hand. The teeth went flying high up into the air, scattering in every direction before raining down like some hellish confetti. Immediately the man let out a wail and dove after them, causing the bus driver to slam on the brakes. He snapped his head back to glare at us. Hell's going on back there? I didn't wait around to find out what happened next. I threw myself over the seat and crashed through the bus's folding accordion doors, punching through them like a fist through a wet paper bag, but not before casting one last glance back at the man. He was still on his knees, hands frantically pawing at the floor as he searched for his missing teeth. Even over the rain and the rumble of the bus's engine, I found I could still hear his voice. 1 tooth, 2 teeth, 3 teeth, for teeth. Ha ha! I turned on the spot and ran for my life. I got back home 5 minutes later. I had run the entire way, unsure whether the man with the yellow teeth had followed me, but not wanting to take the risk. My entire body slick with a combination of rain and sweat. My parents came down almost immediately, no doubt on account of all the screaming. My dad had looked especially pissed, right up until he'd seen the look on my face, and then I guess he must have realized that whatever was going on with me was serious, because a few minutes later he was on the phone with the police. The police arrived 20 minutes later, where I was then hit with a barrage of questions. Giving a description of the guy wasn't hard. When I mentioned the guy's teeth, however, the 2 policemen had shared a look, and then a few minutes later there were more cops in my kitchen asking questions, their boots tracking muddy half-moons on the carpet. I tried to be as accurate as I could, but really whenever I tried to recall anything about the man's appearance, all my mind would bring up was those awful yellow teeth. They found Reese's body the very next morning. His jaw had been entirely removed, and every tooth had been ripped clean out. None of his teeth were ever found, but of course I know what happened to them. And in the quiet moments between therapy sessions, I can still hear the man with the yellow teeth counting. 1 tooth, 2 teeth, 3,